This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. I'm your host, Rabanzo. This podcast features conversations with me and indie music artists. Conversations intended to help other indie musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. So, as you know, I love sharing my personal experience and the things I'm learning from other musicians and songwriters here on the podcast. And you also know that you can be privy to those learnings by joining the Unstarving Musician community. In the process, you probably also know you'll be supporting this podcast. Just go to unstarvingmusician.com to join. In doing so, you'll get an email from me usually every 7 to 10 days with tips, hacks, insights, tricks, all the things you need to know to make your music journey a little better and brighter. And you'll also get a free gift from me, a token of my appreciation for being part of the Unstarving Musician movement. Where we are.
Hey, before we get started, is this what's the rating on this podcast? Because if I need to sometimes I'll just, like I just did, say shit or something. If I need to self-censor and not do things like that, it's good to know now.
You can say whatever you want. That is my potty mouth guest, Jamie Hill. I'm just kidding. He's not that bad. Not at all. It's just something I wanted to drop at the front of this episode because I thought it was a little bit funny, and hopefully Jamie finds it funny too. Today's January 3rd, 2019. Happy New Year, and thank you for coming back with me into the new year, coming forward with me into the new year for another season, another year of the Unstarving Musicians podcast. Jamie is a producer, a songwriter, and principal business partner and spouse of Shannon, who was also recently featured on this podcast. He's co-host of a podcast called Misfit Stars, which is for the community that he and Shannon have built. We start off the conversation with something interesting about the podcast that was interesting for me as a podcaster, but it should be interesting to you too. And the reason is that we get into how he and his partner in crime are using Patreon in conjunction with this podcast and other artistic endeavors to put together their DIY artist careers and the community that surrounds it. This is all based on being of service to others and, of course, creating great art. We touch on the annual album fundraiser thing that he and Shannon do, also about the urgent times we're in, and we get into some marketing. For example, Jamie tells me how he draws clients by simply making stuff and sharing it, how he and Shannon go to open mics together, and how this feeds into the whole marketing of their DIY careers. And also he says writing books to sell, or talks about that is something we could or should do. He, in fact, is writing a book of essays on how to have an independent art career, how to build a better one, how to do it better. And lastly, we get into the varying degrees of sobriety and much other stuff in between. Jamie says that not all art necessarily has to be a money-making endeavor, and that it's still important to do stuff just because you believe in it and because you want to signal boost it into the world. I love that. I think you're going to like this conversation, and I think you're going to also like the song that you will hear at the end, which is a sample of Jamie's production work. It's a song called Continental Divide, which is by Shannon Curtis. All right, here is me and Jamie Hill. Well, we're rolling now, so because I want to ask you about your podcast. It was on my list of things to ask about. So you did recently start it. It's called Misfit Stars, right?
Yes.
Tell me about the inspiration.
So, a small amount of context. You know this, but for people listening who don't, I'm married to a woman named Shannon Curtis, who's an artist whom you have had on your podcast. Mm-hmm. And Shannon and I do a relatively uniquely community-focused approach to how we engage people around the music that we make. And, it's based around house concerts. And because of that, we're doing kind of everything we do in partnership with people. And so we've evolved at this place after many years of doing this where we don't really have fans anymore. We have community, Mm-hmm. And thinking about the people who support what we do in that way just kind of opened up a lot of doors for us in terms of how we view our relationship with them and the kind of stuff that we want to do with them. We felt a need over the past year or so to develop what, in some other situation might be called a fan club. But we don't have fans. We have community. So what we arrived at with a little trial and error over the last year is Misfit Stars. And it's sort of a community within a community. It's just a way for people who like are the self-selectors, like I am the most into what you guys are doing, to select themselves into it. It's based around a Patreon, and there's different levels of subscription. They're basically all the same. There's a $5, a $10, and a $20. And they all just provide access to, we have a sort of secret Facebook community where people can talk in sort of a more vulnerable, less guarded way. It's kind of a safe space for people to share more vulnerably about things. So there's that. And then we have this podcast that we started doing because we realized that what our people like a lot is just hearing us talk to each other. We do an album fundraiser each year, and it's a 3-week long thing that we do in April. And we do 21 straight days of essentially like a telethon with Facebook Live broadcasts where we're on for an hour, kind of just doing an NPR fundraiser, just exhorting people toward daily goals and trying to get people engaged around what we're doing and, just drive engagement around the fundraiser. And so we learned in that process that our people just love tuning to the live broadcast because it's just me and Shannon talking with each other about stuff. And it's much more like a lighthearted, goofy kind of tone on those broadcasts. But we thought, what if we could give our people us talking with each other about stuff, but have it be kind of more serious? Because a part of the way we've kind of organized our community in this, we're at the center of this community, but we strive to make it be as decentralized as possible, and we encourage our people to interact with each other, and we see it happening a lot because we've been doing this for a while now, and it seems like for whatever reason our people use us as an excuse to talk about more serious and deep stuff because they know that we go there, and I think that we create a space where they feel emboldened to do that themselves, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And so we thought, what if we did a podcast where we were just kind of talking about stuff in a more serious way? And it's lighthearted. I mean, Shannon and I are, chatty. And, and because we live together and work together, it's really important that we make each other laugh a lot, because if we didn't, everything would get way too serious and it would just be, overwhelming and heavy. So there's a lighthearted aspect to it, but we're trying to tackle the stuff that for us feels like in the week we're recording the pod is on our mind in an important kind of way. We both like to talk with one another just about how you live life and how you live life in an emotionally healthy way and what's going on in the world through that lens. And so the way we structure the podcast is that we have a weekly episode. They come out Wednesday. And every other episode, they're all about an hour long, and every other one gets 7 or 12 or 15 minutes in, and just when it's getting really good, I can't wait to hear the rest of this story, it fades out. And we have a little pitch for, hey, if you want to hear the rest of this, go unlock all episodes at misfitstars.com, which just is a redirect essentially to the Patreon, and then people can kind of select the level they want to support at. So it's a way to drive engagement around that. And it's also a way for our people who want to select into that group and who want to support us a little more to have a little special something that's just for them as a thank you for that. Because we're a married pair of working artists, and because neither of us comes from money, we don't have trust funds, neither of us has ever gotten an inheritance, the money we make to live, we legitimately make doing art. And we've learned in that process that the more opportunities that you give someone to support you, the more opportunities that you give people to support you, the more support you'll get. And I know it sounds really simple when I say it like that, but if you only have one thing, one way for people to support you, you can buy my CD or not buy my CD. Well, maybe people don't buy CDs now. They listen to Spotify or whatever, But if you have 15 ways that your people can support you, you can buy a CD, or you could download a concert film, or you could you could do a house concert, or you can support the album fundraiser, or you can do our Patreon, et cetera, et cetera. Some people will be I want to do options 2, 4, and 7. One person will be I want to do all of them, and it's great to sort of accommodate both of those scenarios.
It may sound simple to you when you say it, but it's brilliant, actually. a lot of aspects of it, and you ended on, I don't know, maybe the most important one in giving people different ways to support you. But I love that it's a community-driven project. I'm curious as a podcaster, which has nothing to do about all the cool things that you brought up, but you made me want to ask, how are you hosting it so that you can do the, how are you hosting it? And I ask because the private part of it is interesting. The member part of it.
Totally. So there's two ways, and we host each podcast episode in two places, right? And so we just set up a very simple domain, misfitstars.com, and it's just a WordPress site. There's this brilliant podcasting hosting plugin. It's like a WordPress plugin, and it's also a separate site called Blueberry, BLUBRRY.com. And they have this brilliant plugin where you can basically just kind of do a WordPress post, and then the plugin makes the post screen have a little thing at the bottom where you can basically click on upload a podcast, and it will upload it. They host it. They take care of all the hosting and distribution from their side, and it just appears on your website with this beautiful little sort of HTML5 player where people can go, like they can go to misfitstars.com and they can play the episodes right there. They have all these nice little players with, 15 seconds back, 15 seconds forward, all the stuff you'd expect. And, the description and all that. It looks really nice. Looks good on mobile. But then also they do all the distribution. So it also appears, it appears within about 2 minutes on Apple Podcasts. It appears within about 45 minutes or so on Spotify, somewhere in the middle on Stitcher, and kind of everywhere else. There's like 7 places it goes. Those are the 3 biggies, but it kind of gets more niche than that too. And so the way we structure it is that when we make the podcast, every other episode is just free to the public. So we just post that and it goes, and you can listen to the whole thing, and it's simple. And then every other one is a teaser episode where we do that, it goes for 15 minutes and it fades out. And then you hear Shannon and me delivering a little pitch about, hey, if you want to support us, this is a way to do that. If you want to hear the rest of this episode, then, go to misfitstars.com, click on the second big pink button that says unlock all episodes. And that's a redirect to our Patreon. And so in the public facing world, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Misfit Stars website, it's alternating free episode, teaser episode, free episode, teaser episode, just back and forth. And then on the Patreon, we post all of the podcast, the full episodes, but every other one is a patrons-only post, and then every other one is available to the public post.
And how is what I was really curious about is how is the Patreon-only one set up so that it is Patreon-only? What provides the... I guess the separation between the ones that are fully public and the ones that are not.
What's amazing about it is that is just built-in Patreon functionality. Like, we don't have to do anything special at all. When you do a post on your Patreon, for every post you do, there's just a little thing in the upper right-hand corner that's just radio buttons, like who can see this post. And, there's public or patrons only. And if you click patrons only, you can make it be all patrons, or you can even segment it out by what they call tiers, which is like pledge levels, So we just click the button for patrons only, all tiers, and it's as simple as that. And then the way it appears when you go to the Patreon, like if you're not logged in as a subscribed user, you see like the graphic, and you see like the beginning of the descriptive text, but then it like fades out. And it's overlaid gently with a little lock icon, and it's like, click to unlock this episode. And then it redirects you to the subscription page. And it's just the simplest thing. It's really well thought out.
And is the Patreon-only content hosted on Patreon or somewhere outside of Blueberry?
Remarkably, all the Patreon content is hosted on and by Patreon.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
cool.
It's just the simplest thing.
Okay. Yeah, that's neat. I haven't even really thought much about doing anything like that myself, but for the few people, I'm not sure how many podcasters listen to this podcast, but for the few that do, now you have some ideas, and I certainly do too.
Right on. Yes.
I was going to start with, so it's we started talking about Misfit Stars, and boy, I think we could drill down a lot in a few different things that you said there. And that was at the bottom of my list to ask, not only because it was my thought process of like some things I wanted to ask, not so much in ranked in order of curiosity, but you were talking about it. I'm like, let's roll. But I wanted to start with telling you I had so much fun interviewing your wife, Shannon, and that I think in retrospect and listening, yeah, she is. I felt like we were laughing like two little girls at a sleepover the whole time for whatever reason. And the episode,
oh man, that is so sweet.
Yeah, she was a lot of fun, and the episode will be posted in the show notes for those of you who do want to listen to it. She's a great artist, and you, Jamie, have done a great job in working with her on the recording and engineering aspects of it. And in my mind, she's queen of house concerts, so it's something to listen to if you're interested in house concerts. And then the next thing I was going to ask you about is the name of your home studio. Can you talk about it and where it came from?
Yeah, totally. So for the longest time, when Shannon and I met, she was in the middle of a transition from Sacramento, California, where she was living at the time, down to Los Angeles, just to sort of start a new phase of her life, go somewhere where she didn't know anybody, and just kind of start things fresh. We met right as she was kind of about to do that, and so I chased her down there, and we built eventually a little studio in our place where we lived down there, and I called that Secret Agent Audio Services. Which was just sort of a name that I had for some other stuff I was doing at the time. And it was simple, and I already had cards made, and I thought you needed cards. I don't think you need cards. But I didn't have the money to make new cards, and so I just stuck with that name.
Makes sense.
And so I went with that for a while. Well, right, totally. Economize where you can. And so I went with that name for a long time. Shannon and I just relocated from Los Angeles up to Tacoma, Washington, about a year and 1 day ago, I think.
I'm not sure I knew it was that recent.
I know, it's brand new for us still, especially because like when we arrived, we renovated the house that we moved into ourselves, like just the two of us, because like we had the time to do it. We'd sort of budgeted for that, but we couldn't like hire a contractor really. So we took like 2 months of learning how to renovate as we were renovating. Then I had to make a record with another band actually from Texas, from the DFW area.
Who was that?
And then I had to make Shannon's record, and then we had to leave for tour. And so like it really just feels like we're getting to know what it feels like to live in our new town now, just over this last 2 months that we got home from tour. Like we've settled in at home. We don't have to like work on the house at all. We already did that, and we can just sort of live here now. And it's just the nicest thing. But the opportunity arose like with that inflection point. I was like, why don't I just make a new start with the name of what I'm doing too? And so I chose the name Department of Energy Management, which is just kind of like a dad joke. Sort of. Well, it's funny. Like, I had the idea. I don't know why. It just kind of popped into my head. And I Googled it. And despite the fact that it sounds like a completely generic public utility, there is no public utility anywhere in the United States of America that is actually called the Department of Energy Management. And I was actually able to get the domain name departmentofelnergymanagement.com.
I saw that.
It's just this remarkable thing. Like, how could this name not be taken for something else? But the reason I chose the name and the sort of wink and nod kind of pun of it is that a lot of what I view my job as doing is just very carefully managing the flow of energy. Emotional energy, really, and also electrical energy, I suppose. But, I'm a musician first. If you were to ask me, like, how do you identify? I identify primarily as being a musician. I was trained as a musician. I was in bands when I was younger. I have that musician's desire to connect with people emotionally and to put good into the world by doing that. And it's become increasingly important to me as I get older to work on, like, specifically, like, artistic projects. And I mean that as opposed to commerce, if that makes sense. I'm not so into just, I'm not so interested in doing records that are trying to be a hit for somebody in a formula that's been created by somebody else. I had a time in Los Angeles where I was, chasing like any kind of work I could get when I was sort of starting out. And I did mix projects for stuff like that. Like when you're in LA, you can like work forever just mixing records, singles, 2 songs at a time, for people who are trying to take some marginally talented 19-year-old and turn them into a pop sensation. And, the work has interesting challenges. They're typically pretty dense Pro Tools sessions, and there's sort of an intellectual joy in trying to figure stuff like that out. It's nerdy and it's technical and it's fun. But I just realized after doing a bunch of that kind of work that there was, that there's absolutely no spiritual fulfillment in it for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I've been working to curate my own career in the last, I've probably had the luxury to be able to do that in the last 5 years or so. It's funny, when Shannon and I first started out, I was touring for a living. I was touring as a sound engineer. That's how I got into doing music full time. Is I was on the live side of things first, just because it's easier to get a job doing front of house, for tours or clubs or whatever at first, than it is to get to someone to trust you with a $10,000 album budget.
Sure.
So I was touring, and you make a lot of money touring. You can if you're decent at it, and I was decent at it. Shannon was working on getting started with her solo career, and she was supporting herself by doing substitute teaching, in the Los Angeles Unified Public School system. And then, doing college tours as a way of supporting other touring that she was doing at the same time, coffee shops and small venues and that kind of thing. But I was, for a couple of years there, essentially supporting us. I was contributing, a lot of the time, 90% of the income to the situation,
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed pretty clear to me from the moment I met Shannon that she's just a singular talent, surely talented enough of a voice. I don't mean literally the voice that comes out of her, but who she is as a person, her voice in the world. I always felt, just kind of from immediately meeting her, that was something that we would be able to engage people around, that she wouldn't have trouble, figuring out eventually a way to make that work as a career and as a source of income. So I just kind of placed a bet early on that if I kind of effectively acted sort of like her label from a financial point of view, just supported her while she got her thing going, that eventually we'd be able to kind of flip that. We could get her thing to the point where it could take over the lion's share of our income, and then I could kind of bootstrap myself up from there, and it kind of worked, which is neat. We worked really, really hard on, we invented this house concert model, and we iterated that over years and got it to the point where it's a pretty sustainable thing that we can do, where we can make, a comfortable middle-class living. We're not wealthy, and we probably never will be, but, we're fine. Which then has given me the opportunity not to chase after every single possible thing I can do with the music gear I have to just somehow generate little scraps of money, but be much more intentional about the stuff that I'm working with, about the energy that I'm helping put into the world. So, sort of a long answer to your question, but Department of Energy Management, it just seemed like a nice way to honor the idea that what I aim to do with my work is to sort of curate from, the intersection of where my abilities lie and where my interests are, stuff that puts good energy into the world, and then hopefully to help corral that energy and amplify it and focus it and signal boost it so that it can enter the world in a much more cohesive, unified, directional, intense kind of way, and hopefully, achieve better for the artists who I'm helping make it for, and then also achieve better in terms of connecting with people.
Well, and one of the best things about that answer, purely from an interview standpoint, is you brought it back to the original question, which was not easy. I appreciate it. But you said a lot of really good stuff in there, and it makes me want to say again, you can maybe connect as a listener, if there maybe have been a few things here that you're very curious about that will we'll touch on some of, but you can connect some more dots by listening to the episode that Shannon was in, which will be in the show notes, or just searching for Shannon Curtis on unstarvingmusician.com, and you'll find it. So, by the way, who was the Texas band that you just mentioned as you guys were renovating the house? Do you remember who that was, the DFW band?
Oh, of course, yeah. They're wonderful. They're called the Gibbonses, Gibbonses. They're a married husband and wife couple, Brandon and Jackie Gibbons, and so they are the Gibbonses. They're so cool. They call what they do Southern Soul, and to my ears, it sits sort of in a triangle, the three sort of edge points of which are Texas country. For people listening who don't know what Texas country is a genre that kind of only exists in Texas, and there are bands that are huge. They'll do massive arena tours with 3 tour buses and 6 trailers, and they never leave the state of Texas. Like, they might go into Oklahoma, but that's it.
It's part of Texas now.
It's like, yeah, totally. It is, really, yeah, Upper Texas. And it's like rock with fiddle or rock with banjo, kind of, you know? Some of it's really good. It's muscular, kind of. It's a more muscular approach to country. And so, that's sort of one of those 3 points. And then, Muscle Shoals would be one, and, Memphis maybe would be another. So there's kind of a soulfulness about what they do, kind of like a Stax Volt kind of thing. And then there's also kind of a deeply Southern thing about what they do. But the singer is the wife, Jackie, and she's 4'11" or something. She's this little teeny tiny amazing human being with this massive voice. Just astonishing, this massive raw bluesy voice. But she was trained in musical theater too, so she has the technical underpinnings to anything she needs to do from a technical point of view, she can do, but she does so with restraint. The songwriting's really good. And they've been doing this really cool house concert thing. They have essentially adopted our house concert model. A lot of people have, but they're one of them. And they've been finding a bunch of success with that. And we've made 2 records together now. This last one debuted in iTunes Top 100 on the country chart.
Nice.
Which is kind of funny because it's not a country record, but they have that thing where they're kind of doing something that's unique, and so people don't know where to put them. They will end up in rock, they'll end up in pop, and they'll end up in country. And so we had a top 100 country record.
Very nice. Well, I heard them on your let's see, secretagentaudio.com/work page. I was going through some of the work that you've done, and they were on there. Cool. And it's funny that I didn't know they were from DFW, but I was like, that name seems weirdly familiar to me. But you have a lot of great stuff there, and I probably only made time today to go through about a half a dozen tunes. So it made me want to ask if you had a Spotify playlist that has focuses on your work and maybe some of the influences, because if you don't, you should.
You're right. I should. And I don't.
Well, you have a lot of really great stuff that you could share with people. For a couple of reasons. You've done work with, you've done some great work, it sounds like, and also just sharing those artists, I think would be really fun. I'm looking forward to going back and listening to more of that. This is I will say that on secretagentaudio.com/work. First of all, anyone listening can now just go there. But there is a SoundCloud playlist, which is kind of nice only because, Spotify playlists at a certain point you need to be logged in to listen to, depending. And SoundCloud, you don't. So, that said, I do need to have a Spotify one. Your suggestion is sound, and I will take it. But there is a SoundCloud playlist there that has 20 or so things that I've done over the years that I'm just particularly proud of. Yeah. And if you want to share that on your website, there is a share button right on the front of it. I will do it. And you know what? Thanks for pointing that out. I would imagine that at least some of the people that listen to the podcast and just out there in general really, really love SoundCloud and would prefer to do just that, listen to it on SoundCloud. So thanks for mentioning that. This is a left fielder, but I'm going to preface it by saying it made me laugh, and it maybe was not intended to be funny. There's a couple reasons that it made me laugh. If you're curious about them, you can ask me after you, anytime during our conversation or not. But I'm going to just read it.
Yeah.
It comes off your website. And it's going to sound out of context because I'm only reading a sentence or part of a sentence from it. And you wrote on there, if you're a Mexican lesbian punk band, I very much want to make a record with you.
Yeah, totally. I love that you pulled that out. So, there's a larger context for this. So I live in the United States of America. I assume you have an international following. So just to be clear, I live, in Tacoma, which is in Seattle, which is in the United States. And as I'm sure most people are pretty aware of, our country's going through a little bit of difficulty right now. There's been some political stuff. We're just kind of in a little bit of an ugly time where some pretty nasty, dangerous voices feel emboldened and empowered in our country. And so there's been a huge rise over the last couple of years in hate crimes directed against, specifically Jewish people and brown-skinned people of every description and LGBTQI people and the like, women. So, the slightly larger context on the thing that I wrote on my website, the sentence preceding what you read is, I am specifically interested in amplifying vulnerable voices. And, I've always kind of been interested just in general in my life. I've always been more of an alternative music person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed listening to kind of weirder stuff, since I was a kid. And I've always been into adventurous stuff in that way. And a lot of it tends to be made by, people who come from, like non-white Anglo-Saxon heteronormative situations, but it really almost feels these days like it's a duty for people in my country to be extra mindful of the fact that people who are not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males might be having a much harder time of things right now, and might have a lot more to be kind of watching their backs about, to be fearful about. It's not a comfortable time. And so, if I can do anything with the small voice I have to use it to uplift people who are more marginalized in that way, who are being more predated upon in that way, then I want to do it. It feels like something I can do. So yeah, but that's where that came from. But yeah, if you're in a Mexican lesbian punk band,
perfect.
Yeah, seriously, come make a record. Come make a record with me, please. Let's amplify your voice. Let's amplify 4 communities at once. There,
Yeah, you know what I've noticed, and I talk about this with some regularity. I think before I will actually use the proverbial record button to drop in on our conversation from the beginning, we were talking about the fact that I have been living in Panama with my wife for the past couple of years, and meeting other, like there's a lot of Italian immigrants here, Colombian, Venezuelan, and from all over the world, and I realized that I'm blind and ignorant to the politics of other people's countries. But I think that having moved from the U.S. to Panama has given me a different perspective that allowed me to easily see that so many other countries are going through the exact same, very similar thing to what it feels like is happening in the U.S.
Totally.
Yeah, so I don't know why. I kind of said it only to say, if it makes you feel any better, it's happening everywhere else too. It seems like, but by the same,
Shannon and I are big. Go ahead.
No. By the same token, I get a little bit of bliss by being ignorant to other people's politics, and it probably has enabled me to be friends with it. Well, and this sounds small to me. I was going to say it allows me to be friends with people that I might have a more challenging time being friends with otherwise, purely out of political views, and that sounds kind of small of me in a way, I think, because I'm, have been learning, like a lot of us have, to ask more questions and try to understand where people are coming from, just because they don't necessarily think like me on everything that maybe some of which happens to be hot button issues for me. It's good for me to sort of understand. So anyway, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. And, I heard the best thing recently. I believe that the person who said it is Deray Mckesson. If you're not familiar with who he is, he's a public speaker. He's an activist. He came to prominence in the Black Lives Matter movement. He's that black guy who always wears a blue sleeveless Patagonia vest, like a bright blue vest. He's that guy.
Okay.
And he's wonderful. He's so sensitive, so caring. But he said the best thing on something I was listening to a couple of months ago, which is meet people where they are, but don't leave them there, right?
Yeah.
Which to me just was so profound. This idea that, it's important. It's really important to keep lines of communication open with people whose views and values differ from yours, even people whose views and values you might find repugnant. But just
right.
the act of meeting them where they are doesn't mean that you have to acquiesce to that worldview or tacitly accept it, right? Like in your engagement with people whose views you see as being wrongheaded, you can endeavor to communicate the positive values that you wish to uphold, the way that you see things differently, And I think that, don't let me get too far off topic here. I'll keep this short. But I think it's important in this time to do that because, as you mentioned, we're seeing a rise of ethno-nationalism worldwide right now. And it's dangerous. It's bad. Anyone who has studied any small amount of world history of the 20th century knows how this goes, and it doesn't go well. And it ends in world war. And if we want to avoid world war, we've got to push back against the stuff that's happening. And it's happening right now, and it's happening in real time. So it's valuable to keep lines of communication open with people whose politics might be different than yours. But it's also, I think, really important in this time to recognize that, differing politics in this time often means that one side is upholding the oppression of other people, And this kind of comes back to that whole Mexican lesbian punk band thing, right? Like politics right now seem generally, very loosely, worldwide divided into two camps. People who think that it's cool to be Mexican or lesbian, or trans or, Muslim or whatever, just whoever you are. And people who think that that isn't cool and that it's a threat to their ethno state, and that's not good.
No. And thanks for mentioning Deray Mckesson. I don't know if I said his name right, but I will look him up, be in the show notes too. Mm-hmm. And you made me think of someone maybe you would enjoy looking up. And you may know who he is, Jay Severett. You'll certainly know him when I say that to you that he wrote the theme song for True Blood, the HBO series. But he was, he was on a few episodes back. I got an introduction through one of my very first interviews, and awesome. He said something. I wish I could remember my question because it would give a lot more context. But he said something that you reminded me of, and his response, he offered with some humor, but he said he was fearful that what was around the corner was thermonuclear war. But the underlying, theme beneath the comment was he too was a little worried about what was going on around the world. And I think you guys would enjoy him. Maybe listen to a snippet of the episode or look him up. He's an interesting guy.
That's a great suggestion. Thanks. And I think he's right. And I think that an inference I'm drawing from what you just shared about what he had to say is that, especially as artists, I think we have an exceptional duty to be on the front lines of helping confront this stuff. Yeah. Because art can move the needle, especially on social issues, especially on social justice issues, in a way that nothing else can, Mm-hmm. And art can lead the way in a politically divided time, and art can provide a moral compass in a politically divided time in a way that just mere words or politicking can't do. And I'm not saying that every artist out there needs to be all of a sudden, like writing Billy Bragg records, like just straight political records all the time, every record. But you can use your voice in a mindful way, and you can use your voice in an inclusive way, and you can uphold values you believe in, even as you make the art you make. But it can be part of the whole picture of being an artistic person in the world. Yeah. And I think that it's important maybe in this time to be mindful of that. I remember after our 2016 election, it felt very clear to me very quickly, like there were two camps of musicians and musical artists, in the States. There were people who were talking about it and confronting it and dealing with it. and there were people who weren't, who were just kind of trying to be like, la, 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 I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I do love songs, you know. And I realized in a very stark way in that time that all of a sudden I had absolutely no interest in hearing what that second group of people had to say, because it didn't feel of the time and of the moment, and it didn't feel like it spoke at all to the place in my life that I was experiencing. And it, you know, stuff just feels really urgent right now. And I just feel like there's not a lot of space right now to be an artist who's just like, no, it's everything's cool and I'm just doing art, you know? Like, no, man, everything is not cool.
I'm thinking of another one of my friends I met through the podcast, and largely because I like to say another side benefit of this whole art thing in these times is I was reminded by something my good friend Rockin' Johnny says, and that is that your art can also give people an hour or more of time to just be together and forget about all this stuff, particularly in a live music environment. And I thought that was really cool. Rockin' Johnny Bergen told me that.
Rockin' Johnny Bergen, you know what? And that's a good point of view, and I think he's right.
Yes, he definitely is. All right, we're going to turn the other direction now. I'm going to ask you something that feels very much serving of the listeners, although I think a lot of the stuff we've been talking about has been, most of it, all of it. But how do you market your talents to the socially conscious creative niche that you market to?
You know, it's funny. It's my marketing is based on attraction rather than promotion, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
You know, it's funny. Like, I used to try to market. You know, years and years ago when I was first starting out, you know, 2011, 2012, I was just starting out doing production full time. I'd always kind of done it not full time, but finally it was I made the shift, and it never really seemed to draw in the kind of stuff that I wanted to work on. It always seemed to draw in just random stuff that wasn't really a good fit for me, for who I am, for what I want to do. But something I did learn really quickly is that every time you make a good record, you get a couple calls to make a couple more records. You know, because people play stuff for each other and people listen, and, you know, I know that as a musician, I'm always reading liner notes and asking people, hey, who engineered that? That sounds amazing, you know? And I know that other musicians do that too. So, you know, still to this day, my primary way of generating, you know, new stuff for myself to work on is just making stuff. Making Shannon's records is helpful for that, for sure. We make a full-length, full production record of her material every June. We put one out. So there's a constant stream of new stuff, you know, there that I'm putting out, and that's good.
That is so intentional every June. I love it.
Right? Well, you know, because we're working artists, and we do a tour that starts in the middle of June. So, like, we release a record in the middle of June, so we have something new to sell people, so that when we see them on tour, it's not like, you know, if we were touring on last year's record, they'd be like, I've already bought it. Thank you. You know, but if we have something new, we can sell them a $10 thing and multiply that by 75 shows. And, you know, so, you know, we just moved to Tacoma. I mentioned that. And something that I've been doing around here is I've been going to open mics, and just as a way to, Shannon and I've been going together, just as a way of just kind of seeing what's out there, what the vibe in our new town is, and who's doing what. First of all, it's incredibly artistic, and there are so many people doing so many good things, and it's really cool. But there was this one young man who I found. We walked into a coffee shop that we didn't even know there was an open mic at, just to get some coffee. And this guy was playing, and we were just transfixed. It was like, who are you? I followed him on Instagram. He ultimately followed me back, and we just developed this relationship. And I'm working on a song for him right now. And it's just like a thing, you know, but it's just a song of his that I heard that I just felt super passionate about. Like, it connected with me on a deeply emotional level. And, you know, I'm not going to make any money off of this. This is not a money-making endeavor, but, like, not all art necessarily has to be money-making endeavors, right? Like, it's still very important just to do stuff because you believe in it and because you want to signal boost it in the world, you know, because it's the kind of energy that you think needs to be out there. And, you know, in my experience doing stuff like that, just putting this out into my world, my SoundCloud thing or my Spotify playlist that I'm going to make. It will generate, people will listen to it, and it'll see one more little data point that they can be like, oh, okay, here's a bunch of clues as to what this guy is into and the kind of stuff that he enjoys making, and that kind of stuff attracts.
Yeah.
Also, something that's been really good for both Shannon and me, for your listeners, if you want to promote something, write a book.
Yeah.
We found this out with the house concert book that we wrote.
Yep, that's how I found
for
you.
People listening who, yeah, totally. And so this is in the podcast, I'm sure, that you did with Shannon. But just to briefly recap for people who are, listening, Shannon and I invented a business model around house concert touring, a sort of a way to monetize it and build community. That's wonderful, and it's very effective, and you can quit your job, and it's great. It's called No Booker, No Bouncer, No Bartender. I made $25,000 on a 2-month house concert tour, and how you can too. And the book drew all these people into our world. The Gibbonses, that band from Texas I was telling you about, they found us because of the house concert book originally. And then through finding out about us because of that, they read an essay that I had written that got published in, I think, CD Baby's DIY musician blog maybe. And between those two data points, not having really listened to music, but just here's something they wrote, here's another thing he wrote. They're like, I want to talk to this guy. And now we've made 2 records together. It's funny, with that in mind, sort of, about a year and a half ago, I started writing a book of essays. Shannon and I have lived a pretty stubbornly DIY art life for 12 years at this point. And we just had to learn a lot of things by virtue of the fact that we're super stubborn, and we don't have day jobs, and we, and we're intellectually engaged and enjoy figuring stuff out and figuring out new best ways to do things. And I've written a book of essays about how to, just how to do independent art careers better, 50 essays. Some of them are practical, some of them are more inspirational, ways to realign your thinking or whatever. It's close to finished, and that'll be a wonderful way, I think, to attract people to what I do, because, in a non-musical sense, it'll give people 50 more data points. Here's what this person's values are. Here's what he thinks about stuff. And I know that when I look for people who I want to work with, the technical musical part of what they do is only part of it. It's also really important to me to connect with people around values and worldview and approaches, only because I feel like if you are kind of pulling away from each other on a few different fronts, it's hard to have sometimes a harmonious working relationship. But if you work a little bit to find people with whom you're simpatico, you kind of will be energetically moving in the same direction to begin with, and you'll probably get further down the road together.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
As far as marketing, write stuff. Put your points of view out into the world.
Yeah, and I have a friend. We're certainly not the first in the world to talk about it, but a friend who's not in the music world. Maybe he is a little bit, but he's in tech in web design and development specifically, and he's gone through as a freelancer phases of trying to be a freelancer, having to go get a job again, going back to being a freelancer. But what he had some epiphany that made him spend a couple of days writing down, what, among other things, what he really enjoyed working on and what he didn't enjoy working on. So similar to what you just said, he started focusing on what he absolutely loved working on and learned how to say no to the other things, and then gets into some more specifics about how to find that stuff. But very similar. Yeah, I love that.
Oh, that's great. I love it. Oh, yeah, and it's so true, And I think that your friend really touched upon something that it took me a while to figure out, which is that people don't just want to hear you talk in a single-minded way all the time about the one thing it is that you do, it's important, I think, to present a well-rounded view of yourself to the world, whether you're an artist or a producer or an engineer or whatever. We're not just monochromatic beings. We're not robots who do just this one thing that we're programmed to do. We're complex individuals. We contain multitudes, right? And I think that the richer understanding I have of who a person is, and the more they've attempted to communicate to the world, to me, what they value and who they are, the more interested in them I am as a person, and the more inclined I am to want to do something creative with them.
Yeah,
I think
totally.
that art ideally is not just like music. Isn't just about music, right? Music is about the human experience. Like Shannon and I don't do music because we like music, and we love it, but like we do music because we love people.
It's a great reason to do it. Absolutely great reason to do it too. And it really shows, I think, a lot of what the two of you do really emanates through Shannon's recordings. And well, they're really your recordings, aren't they, as well? They belong to the two of you, having created them together. But it really emanates through her recordings. Having spoken with her finally, it helps get additional perspective on it. But yeah, that's great stuff.
She's amazing. Yeah, every impulse I have, but not every. I mean, I was a person before I met Shannon, but I am so inspired by her all the time to be a better person. She's one of the most purely kind, honest, intellectually rigorous. Like she's got an integrity about her that's just unimpeachable, and it's incredibly inspiring. And I think that that's the thing that comes through in her work, right? In her writing, in her music or recordings. She's trying so earnestly to accurately and honestly identify and put her finger precisely upon points of the human condition. And I think that, that's the thing that I engage with her. That's the thing that drew me to her as a human. And I think that that's the thing that probably draws other people to her as an artist.
Yeah, and as much as I love the recordings I have heard and her singing and the conversation we've had, I'm guessing I probably only get the very surface of it, but just from somebody who enjoys talking to people and asking them questions and listening to music and loves particularly melody. I love the work that you guys have put together, and I love the way that you're putting together your means of serving your community, the music community, probably an expanded community around it, and putting together a living inside of all that, or maybe around all of that. It's pretty amazing. I hope that people who hear this will go listen to the conversation that I had with Shannon. And, oh, by the way, I want to drop that I actually found out about Shannon's book through a former guest a guest of the podcast named Tom Meany, who's an artist based out of Austin.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and he
awesome.
he calls himself an ambassador for house concerts, and one of the first things he brought up was Shannon's book, which led me to go check it out. And of course, I had seen her name, oddly enough, because we I guess we're kind of in the periphery of some similar circles in the music world, and so I'd seen her name about, so I knew who she was, but didn't really know her. So I'm lucky that I got to meet the two of you. Okay, there's I'll say we have time for one more thing I thought would be nice to ask you about. And when I was making my notes for our conversation, I had one word written down, and then as I was trolling your Facebook page, I was like, oh, I definitely want to ask about this, and hopefully you'll like to talk for a couple of minutes about it. But the word I wrote down was sobriety, and I just had a question mark after that, and then I was like, oh, you just had a really big anniversary around sobriety, and I thought it would be cool to talk about, well, for obvious reasons, but I certainly have a number of friends who are impacted by I guess we still call it substance abuse or alcohol abuse.
Sure.
And many of whom, I guess most of whom have pulled through the end of the tunnel through various stages of sobriety. So, yeah, anything you want to say about your recent anniversary or just in general about it?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm so happy you brought it up. So, yeah, it's funny. I got sober. So for people listening, a small bit of context, I am an alcoholic and drug addict. And I've been sober for 14 and a half years. I got sober on June 20th, 2004. And so it's kind of wonderfully timed, just coincidentally with what Shannon and I do, around our community, because June 20th is it's within 3 or 4 days each year of when we start our summer tour. And I always have my sober birthday. And then I have my half sober birthday on December 20th, which is right before the holidays. And so, it's great because we always there's two different aspects to it. We always have a bunch of stuff going on sort of in the middle of June. So there's, the Facebook algorithm, the engagement's up, and so when I do my main sobriety, I always talk about my sobriety on the anniversary and half anniversary because, in my experience, every time I do, I get a private message from 1 or 2 or 8 people who are losing their shit, barely holding on, and the message hit them at exactly the right time, and I feel like a safe person to talk with about sobriety-related stuff, and maybe I can help. And then in the holiday season, December 20th, when my half anniversary is, for people like me, for people built like me, it's a potentially devastating time of year. The holidays are extraordinarily difficult for people with substance abuse issues, with mental wellness issues, which are, they're often very related. So, it's an opportunity to be of service. And I know that you relate to this. I crept your website a little bit too. And I understand that, that being of service is really important to you. So I know you'll understand what I mean when I say that, in my work, what I learned about being in service in work, I learned directly from getting sober. Part of getting sober, if you do it in a 12-step program, the 12th step is that you be of service to other people. The idea being, it's a multi-layered idea. At its core, it's essentially like a sort of self-preservation thing. Like if you're being of service to somebody else, you're not going to be thinking about yourself in a bad way during that time. So it's just a way to get out of your head and feel better. But then as you kind of get into like longer-term sobriety, you really realize that you can sort of start to help create a better world, the kind of world that you want to live in more. And service work in that way has become really, really important to me, also to Shannon. Because we're artists, we know a lot of other artists, and artistic people, I think the mental conditions that predispose one to be creative and to make art are intertwined to some degree with the mental conditions that would predispose one to have addiction issues. I'm not saying that art is a mental disorder, but, I think that there's at least a small overlap in that Venn diagram. So yeah, sobriety, it's for me at this point, my work and my sobriety are pretty inextricably intertwined. It's informed every single aspect of what I do. But specifically, it's really given me, I think, a very healthy perspective on what it is to work as a producer. I started out as an artist myself, and I thought that I was going to be a rock star when I was young and had sort of a less nuanced vision of who I was, a vision of what I could do in the world and an idea of who I was. I've realized, especially in sobriety, that I really am the happiest when I'm working in service to someone else's ideas. I'm not so much a starter, but I'm a very good finisher. And I think that part of that process, if you do it responsibly, is recognizing that it's not your name that's on the front cover, right? That you are trying to signal boost, to first of all, honestly, like rigorously work to identify what it is that the person with whom you're working is trying to communicate, get your arms around it as completely as possible, and then work as hard as possible in service of their vision to amplify it, to signal boost it, to make it the best version of itself that it can be, to make it emotionally connect to the target they intended to connect to. It's essentially service work. I think the production is service work if you do it right. And my perspective on that, I don't know that I would have that perspective had I not had the opportunity to get sober. It's just been a tremendously transformative thing in my life. And it's also just been this amazing way for me to engage on another level with our community of people too, because I mean, substance abuse, self-medication, there's so many degrees of it. Like, I was a really obvious case. I was doing crystal meth. I was homeless. I was living out of my car. It was very, very clear that I had a problem, right? But there are so many people who live in a much more gray area where it's well, I have 2 to 3 glasses of wine every night, but I'm an executive vice president at the bank. I just got a promotion. My family is happy and healthy. Everything's cool, right? But everything totally might not be cool. But our society just has this very big gray area there where we sort of kind of all agree not to talk about behavior that might feel really damaging, really devastating in a quiet, personal way to the person who's engaging in it. My sobriety has really allowed me to connect with a lot of people like that in kind of a one-to-one way, via our Facebook community, which is just amazing. And it's all just part of the same package. I mean, we, everything we do, because we do our art in community with people, there's no separation, there's no real walls, and so this all just kind of blurs together into this really wonderful, vibrant, rich life where the art we make, the music we make, the community organizing, the community engagement we do, sobriety, it all just kind of blends together and all overlaps. Every bit overlaps into every other bit, and it's extraordinarily rich and fulfilling.
Awesome, man. I think that's going to be helpful in a lot of ways for people who hear this.
I want people who are listening to this to know that, if you're struggling with substance abuse issues, you don't have to keep doing that if you don't want to. There's ways that you can get help, and if you are unsure of how to find one of those ways to get help, find me on Facebook, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, and you may have just answered, but what is your number one favorite way for people to find you if they want to reach out to you about anything we talked about?
If you want to hear music that I've worked on, then go to secretagentaudio.com/work. Although I will say, actually, I'm migrating to the new domain, so just go to departmentofenergymanagement.com. There's already a redirect, and eventually that'll be the primary website when I take the time to make it. And then as far as personally connecting and talking about stuff, find me on Facebook. My Facebook handle is Hilljam, HILLJAM. If you go to facebook.com/Hilljam, that's me. And my messages are open. I welcome outreach from people who I don't know, and I get it frequently. I'm a people person. I like talking with people. So please, if you want to talk about something, just reach out.
Very cool. Well, this episode is going to publish right after our holiday season, first in the new year 2019, but I think the conversation will still be super, super timely. Jamie, thank you so much. Say hi to your lovely wife. As I always say,
I will.
As I always say to everyone, I'm going to be talking to you very soon, and I look forward to digging into more of your work.
Well, Roberto, thank you so much for having me. I just appreciate the thoughtful questions and the kind discourse. It's just been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much. I'm so excited that this is the first episode of 2019. I hope that everyone's year starts off in an auspicious way.
The pleasure was all mine, and hear, hear.
It seems crazy since we've come this far to think that maybe this is where we part. My whole heart believed when we laid on the beach that the infinity we saw was ours. But now we've come to a continental divide, you and I. You're running east and I am tumbling west. And so unless starts flowing uphill, or some other miracle. This only ends one way. I'll see you in an ocean again someday. We started running with unbridled speed toward the sunset, chasing pale pink dreams. But by dark, I lost track of where you had gone. And the summer we ran had ceased, and now we've come to a continental divide. You and I, you're running east and I'm tumbling west. And so unless water starts flowing uphill, or some other miracle, this only ends one way. I'll see you in an ocean again someday. Look, the stars shine bright atop this mountain. They pierce the dark as we make our way down. And I'll see you in an ocean someday.
Hey, thanks for listening. Question for you. Are you struggling to move your music journey forward? I can help. If not personally, then by referring you to the next best available resources. Schedule a free 15-minute call with me to find out if I can indeed help you. It's easy. Just visit unstarvingmusician.com/coaching to schedule your call today. Look for links to just about everything covered in this episode in the show notes at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. This episode was powered by the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs, how to get booked and paid what you're worth over and over again. It's available on paperback, Kindle, and ebooks just about everywhere you can find them. It's also available as a standalone podcast called the Unstarving Musician's Guide podcast. You can learn more about the book and companion podcast at unstarvingmusician.com/book. I'd love it if you picked up a copy and would love it even more if you left a review. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.